Ohio State 38, Penn State 25, padlock stat alert. We had one in this game. The padlock stat is the only stat you would have needed to know before the game to know exactly how the game's going to go, in other words. And some of you have started asking me in my Twitter DMs, hey, is this a padlock stat? Is that a padlock stat? Well, one of you did submit this one. I was already going to go with it, but you were dead on the money. When you have a rushing yards disparity of 208 to 44, you got yourself a padlock stat there. So the stat line, you could even go Justin Fields' stat line as sort of a quasi-secondary padlock stat because he was 28 of 34 for 318 yards and 4 touchdowns. At the half, I really thought they had it in control, and I thought it was over for all intents and purposes. There's no IVE in there. They were up 21-6. It was a 280 to 75 total yards discrepancy. So Justin Fields, you remember last week, and this is kind of what we were talking about coming into this game, they were coming out of that Nebraska game. And if you really wanted to pick them apart, you could look at it and say, ooh, I mean, they ran up the score, yes. Ryan Day had to apologize in the postgame, but Justin Fields was really their most effective runner. When they needed yards on the ground, when they needed to convert, it was kind of Justin Fields. And it's not that you don't like to see that, but you just worry, is too much of the offensive load, is a disproportionate part of our offensive load being put on his shoulders more than already is going to be put on a superstar quarterback? Well, this week, you focused all week long leading up on Sermon and Teague and do you have the horses at running back? Well, they had a pretty good night yesterday. That offensive line, make no mistake about it, played out of their minds. Ohio State's offensive line, you're not going to mention a bunch of them by name. I'm going to mention, Master Teague, 23 runs for 110 yards. That's 4.8 per clip. Trey Sermon, 13 for 56. That's 4.3 per clip. But in total, their running game yesterday went over 200 yards. I think it was 45 for 208. So that's about 4.6 yards per carry. That's noticeably better than the effort that they put out the week before. They just controlled the game. It's not that they ran the score up. It's 38-25, you see there. That's kind of right in line with what the overall point spread was, depending on where you looked at it at what point during the week. But you look at this box score, and it tells the story. 526 to 325 total yards. Time of possession, 37 to 23. Ohio State ran 79 plays, Penn State 57, and Ohio State was 10 of 18 on third down. So you feel good if you're an Ohio State fan because now you look at the rest of your schedule. You got Rutgers at Maryland, Indiana at Illinois, at Michigan State, and Michigan. I heard Herb Street say it last night. I'll reiterate it. I have no clue. Short of COVID, I have no clue what really trips them up in the Big Ten. They're above that line we talk about, that threshold, where you don't necessarily have to worry about these crazy upsets like Michigan suffered yesterday. We're going to talk about the Wolverines a little bit later on. And so outside of COVID, I think they're pretty good. We'll talk about them again in just a second. But how should you feel if you're a Penn State fan? Because I actually had someone ask me this last night. How should I feel? I was very excited coming into the season. Then we have the debacle happen against Indiana. But that's okay because we can salvage everything and we can send a statement to the recruiting world, to the college football world, to our fan base, to potential quarterbacks in the transfer portal out there that we have arrived. Well, we would have had to have beaten Ohio State to do that. That didn't happen. You needed certain things to happen. You needed certain special teams plays to go your way. Turnovers needed to go your way. Critical mass of third downs, both sides needed to go your way. Those things didn't happen. Plus, Ohio State got the fast start, and that was pretty much ball game. But they continue, they being Penn State, they continue to be one of, if not the very toughest challenges for Ohio State in the conference. And I know no one really wants to hear that, but I'm not coaching the team, and I'm not a fan of the team, so it means something to me. I think there are incremental moral victories that you can take. As you're trying to build a program, there are incremental signs, even in losses, or several losses in this case, that could lead you to believe you got a little bit of a firm grasp, or firmer grasp on where you are. Someone asked me about James Franklin, and someone asked me, the context was, I don't know if this is the guy to get us over the hump. I don't know if this is the guy to win a national championship. Twofold reaction. Number one, there is a big gap, I mean a really big gap, between can win a national title and we need to get rid of. There's a very big gap there. So I don't know if he can win a national title. I'll give you my thought in a second. To suggest, I'm laughing at it because it's not really even a serious suggestion to be talking about, oh man, wait, maybe we need to think about the future of this program without James Franklin. No, he's got them in a position where one thing is screaming at you. It's so evident. It was plain as day last night. I mean, they've got Justin Fields versus Sean Clifford. I know they're not on the field at the same time, but really when it comes down to it, that's who you're trying to trade points against, and this is who you're trying to do it with. Here's what is screaming at you. Penn State's a quarterback away. That's what's screaming at you. They've got some wide receiver talent coming on. They've got more in the pipeline, hopefully. They've got good running back talent, even with the 2 injuries. They got good defensive talent. They are a team that if I were to take the grab claw machine that we talk about sometimes and I put the quarter in and I grab the quarterback and I drop him in Happy Valley, whether on the recruiting trail or via transfer, they are a legitimate contender. That's how close they are. A 13-point loss to Ohio State, that's essentially what that is. And look at how close they've played them. That's essentially what that is. But as for Ohio State, shifting back to them, the hallmark of today's true bona fide national championship contending teams, we've seen this. It started to evolve. This didn't used to necessarily be the blueprint. It is now. It used to be that you said you got to have a certain level of defense. Well, now you probably have to have a good combo of wide receivers and a superstar quarterback. That's probably what you have to have. Well, they've got them. You know Justin Fields, but you got Garrett Wilson there, and you got Chris Olave. They were a combined 18 catches for 231 yards last night on 22 targets. So that's getting it done. And those are 2 guys that if you keep them healthy, we're looking at Alabama, for example. We're going to talk about the Tide later. You had Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. Well, then Waddle goes down. So Smith's still there, and he's a superstar. Who's stepping in that place, and is he the caliber or close enough to the caliber of Jalen Waddle? But that secondary, if you want to pick apart Ohio State still, it was a very good win last night. Secondary, still probably some questions there. They're young. So it's natural to expect week over week incremental improvement. Don't necessarily know where they'll be tested to the degree where down the road a few weeks we know what kind of improvement you've had there. But, Ohio State's a clear tier 1. So like I said, outside of some off-the-field issues, I don't know necessarily who trips them up, but Penn State's an interesting team to watch moving forward because that's a really good team. I've got them power rated in my top 10. They're an 0-2 team. I've got them power rated in my top 10. They had a post-game win expectancy rate of, I think, 96% last week in that Indiana game. Doesn't mean anything for the game, but in a predictability model moving forward, they're not a bad team. They had Ohio State in one of the first 2 games, and they lost a game that 96 times out of 100 they probably win. So doesn't mean anything to me, really. It means everything to the standings, but it doesn't really mean anything to me as it relates to them moving forward as long as they don't tap out, which I don't think they'll do.